Historians are generally interested in studying people. More specifically, they are interested in studying the people of the past. Some historians focus on large questions of how humans in different parts of the world have interacted. For example, they might be interested in a general region, like Europe or Asia. Others focus on specific events like the Great War or the Communist Revolution in China in 1949. And then there are other historians who focus on themes that may or may not be specific to any one region. For example, they might be interested in a history of trade, migration, or patterns of wealth and poverty. And then, of course, some historians are interested in the lives of individuals, great politicians, military leaders, or even just a regular person, like a schoolteacher or an individual soldier. But for all the variety of histories that are produced, they have one general theme in common. They tend to be focused on understanding some aspect of the human story in the past. Nevertheless, it doesn't take long to notice that historians don't always agree. In fact, historians are often divided over many aspects of history. Even when they study the same topic, they may disagree on how to explain important aspects of it. Suppose we want to know why the Khmer Empire in Cambodia collapsed so suddenly in the 15th century. With a little research, we'll find that some historians suggest that this was mainly caused by the influence of a new religion, Buddhism. We'll also find that some other historians have argued that it had more to do with the collapse in the food supply. So why is it that historians disagree on so many aspects of their work? We think that this is explained by what we call the problem of history. The problem of history has three main elements. Firstly, the past itself. Secondly, the preservation of that past. And finally, the production of history that tries to explain the past. In many ways, the past is very complicated. Essentially, it is just a fractured collection of moments. These moments do not have an inherent story that forces itself onto us. Instead, we must create the stories that give those moments shape and meaning. Another problem with the past is that it is also very different and distant from the present. The people who lived in the past might share the same biological structure as us, but they lived in very different societies and may have thought about the world in very different ways. We have to pause here for a moment and ask an important question. Can we really know what people of the past thought, or why they did what they did? It is often hard enough to understand what people in today's world think, and to understand why we do what we do. How much more of people living hundreds or even thousands of years before us? In the very least, we should recognize that any attempt to understand the people of the past will be complicated. The second element of the problem of history is the way the past is preserved into the present. Just as the past is always fractured, so its preservation is always fragmentary. What this means is that the past never survives in a complete form. All we have are small bits of the past in the form of documents or other artifacts. These might contain large amounts of information about the past, but they can never contain all of the information. But there is another problem with preserving the past, and that is what we call its management. Sometimes, the fragments of the past that survive are overmanaged. In some countries, for example, powerful governments strictly control access to these fragments to prevent certain facts from becoming known. In other countries, the fragments of the past are undermanaged. In some war-torn countries, for example, rebel groups might come to control a town or city and deliberately destroy important artifacts. Some countries simply lack good libraries or archives that can store fragments of the past safely. And so, the preservation of the past is never perfect. The third main element of the problem of history is how our knowledge of the past is produced. Firstly, we have to accept that history is produced by individuals, and individuals are limited in many ways. They might be limited in their intelligence, the time they have to research a particular problem, or limited in their ability to communicate what they know in a clear and interesting way. But even when an individual historian is very gifted, they may face other constraints on their work. For example, they might write a book that is frowned upon by their government, in which case it could be banned from publication. Even though this may not be a common problem in places like Australia, the United Kingdom, or the United States, we must remember that it is common in many parts of the world. The important point to remember is this: historians are never able to learn or communicate about the past completely free of any personal, social, or political pressures. In the end, the problem of history is essentially that there will always be imperfections in the recovery and representations of the past. It is these imperfections that give rise to the many disagreements that historians have about their work. Part of what makes history so interesting is looking at how different historians try to solve this problem. And that will be addressed in the next video from the Historical Thinking Handbook. Thank you for watching.